Love, that ever-flowing liquid fire of light, ever-expanding and illuminating truth, which is always revealed with wisdom, a spiritual nutrient necessary for vitality that is maintained through selflessness, a filter of ether that aids purity, which is love. Love, a limitless paper lantern floating into infinity on the intentions and actions of initiates of the mysteries. Welcome, fellow Phoenixes, to the Spiritual Phoenix Podcast, where we make a daily offering to the divine by putting our past on the pyre, searching the smoke for spirituality, turning the ashes into art, adapting isolation into connection, and manifesting mental wellness. I'm your host, Ross Cessna, and together we are the Spiritual Phoenix. The intent of this show isn't to tell you what to think, but to get you to think and originally articulate yourself in a way that is uplifting. We are the artists of our lives, and today is a blank canvas. Let's collectively create a better tomorrow. Right now, I'd like to take a moment and focus on what we're grateful for today. Today, I'm grateful for the vulnerability I've gained from doing this, and from just sharing about my experiences in an authentic way and exposing who I really am, what I've really been through, how I deal with situations, whether good or bad, and just being real with myself. This topic that I'm going to get into is actually somewhat uncomfortable for me to bring up realistically, because I think it could be easily misconstrued in some ways. But with no further ado, I will get into today's topic, which is doxing ourselves. For those not in the know, doxing comes from dox, which is the abbreviation of documents, and it's an internet-based practice of researching and broadcasting personally identifiable information about an individual. The methods employed to acquire this information include searching publicly available databases and social media websites like Facebook, hacking, and social engineering. So, doxing has this incredibly negative connotation because people will acquire all this information about you and then publicly release it. And I realize that would be really frightening for some of the stuff that we share. The reality, though, is even through doing this, I'm releasing an abundance of personal information about me, which it is what it is. I feel that the benefit of me being real with my experience and sharing stuff openly with people, being honest about what I've been through, being honest of my defects, of the stuff that I've went through in life, is incredibly valuable, hopefully for other people. It's been very cathartic for me. And I find so much depth of knowledge in it. I'd like to get into a couple quotes too, and then I'll further flesh this out a little bit. Of old, the expert in battle would first make himself invincible and then wait for his enemy to expose his vulnerability. And that was said by Sun Tzu. Vulnerability is not a weakness, but a faculty for understanding. And that was said by David White. So what I'm saying in this is when we dox ourselves, we are making ourselves vulnerable. And there's this very big misconception in our culture that vulnerability is weakness. The reality is, in my experience personally, that by exposing truths of ourselves that are unchangeable, they are who we are, they are what we experience, they are how we think, they are how we feel, that by doing so, we are actually making ourselves in a stronger foundation, because by being able to accept ourselves, if other people acquire information about us that could be damaging, if we've already made peace that those are behaviors that we've done, those are ways that we've acted, those are part of us, and if it's uncomfortable things, it's stuff we're working on, and developing, hopefully, to overcome those issues, or if it's not things that we've overcome and worked on, then hopefully it is things that we've come to accept about ourselves. So, for example, me exposing the fact that I've had psychosis, that I've been horrible to women, that I've lived the life that I have, there's a lot of vulnerability in that. And that's a lot to really expose on this rampant, untamed thing that is the internet. The thing is, since I've talked about it openly, if people know those things about me, it doesn't really come as much of a shock to me. And I understand that the practice of doxing goes a little deeper than that. And I never really agreed with what I'm about to say, but if we're not doing anything wrong, we have nothing to hide. And in my past, I admittedly have done things that I disagree with, that make me uncomfortable, that just aren't who I want to be anymore. So in many ways, by doxing myself and exposing that I did those things, that I participated in those behaviors, that I created those situations, that I fed into all of those things, and putting it out in the open, I can look at myself and say, oh shit, I don't want to be like that anymore. I want to change those behaviors. That's not how I want to be. And granted, I haven't exposed everything about my life. I'm working on getting comfortable to a point where I can, though, because to me, that can help other people become more comfortable with where they're at in their life. This whole thing with the Spiritual Phoenix podcast, the intent behind it really is to show people, other people go through similar stuff. Other people have dealt with similar things, have overcome it, had made peace with it, have progressed it, have turned those experiences into an asset for personal growth. There's no growth in not making mistakes. There's no growth in never saying, I fucked up. There's no growth in hiding the stuff, hiding your weaknesses, really. Because when you can embrace your weakness, and you can learn to take potentially that weakness and turn it into an asset, that is true strength. That's absolute growth there. And the other element of it too is, if I expose my vulnerabilities, it's most likely where anybody who may want to attack me, harm me, do things to me, that's more likely where they're going to go, because they see the vulnerability. So if I already know that those are tender spots for me, I can begin to, I don't want to say mount a defense against it, but I've already accepted that about me. So somebody not accepting it about me or vilifying me for it, when other people have already really been like, that's honorable that you acknowledge that, there's reinforcements there, I guess, is a better way to put it than defenses. It's been reinforced that what I have done is human. I'm human. I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. I don't always think the right things. I don't always do the right things. I don't always say the right things. And being in that place, acknowledging that, gives me a strength that not many people actually can ever attain, because they harbor all their vulnerabilities inside. So then all these little points are points of great soreness, or great prickly points, are very uncomfortable for them. It's like when I went through the whole mental health thing, before I really started doing this and digesting what that meant to me, when people would use the word crazy, it was very upsetting and hurtful for me. When people would make fun of people with bipolar, or use bipolar, oh, like my car is being bipolar now, or say this is being bipolar, that's bipolar. Very upsetting to me. So when I can accept myself, I'm more accepting of the reality in general. I'm more accepting of other people's perceptions. Whether I agree with it or not is really on me, and it goes back into the mindset of I can either be swayed by great praise or by insults. Because if I get swayed by praise when people are critical of me, that'll make it sting more. And if I'm overly sensitive of when people are critical of me, I'll be more inclined to gravitate towards praise. And it's not to say that having people recognize and acknowledge what you're doing, you shouldn't take some kind of sense of whatever from it, but you still have to remember to be you, and that those things that they're saying, they don't define your whole essence, if that makes sense. I feel like I've really covered the gist of this. So if you want to hear something discussed, or you have something you want me to read or play on air on this podcast, or if you have a 1 minute or less poem you'd like me to put on the sister podcast, the Phoenix Poetry Podcast, you can call the Phoenix voicemail line at 480-535-2561. You can follow me on all social media at Spiritual Phoenix. I offer free daily tarot readings at Spiritual Phoenix Tarot. I started the side podcast, Phoenix Poetry Podcast, like I mentioned, and it's on iTunes and several other platforms. You can visit my website, thespiritualphoenix.com. I'm going to be putting stuff up on the store. It may already be up by the time you hear this even. With that, I love, respect, and appreciate all of you. Love and light. Namaste. Peace, people. Time to put this episode on the pyre.
Don't believe. Don't follow. Do not consume. Do not watch. Largely what I'm talking about here is reclaiming experience. This is what's been taken from us. It's a self-advancing, self-expanding, self-defining process, and it takes no prisoners.
The real world isn't a spiritual world, it isn't a material world, it isn't an empty world, it isn't a solid world. It's simply